Ever wonder how all of these life forms interact and how wolves fit in? Well, today we're going to start looking at that using a concept called umvelts. Hi, welcome back to the Science of Wolves. And this is the first of two videos that will look at how wolves perceive and react to the surrounding environment. However, to start, we'll need to review a concept that helps explain how animals react to the surroundings, which they can accomplish in almost an infinite number of ways. And that's because an animal's perception is based on its senses, and no one organism can detect all the information that's out there, only a range of it. For example, humans cannot hear the high-frequency sounds that dolphins produce, or the low-frequency sounds that elephants produce. We have a range of frequencies we can hear, and that's it. Obviously, sound doesn't stop, but our ability to hear it does. All of our senses have limits, and wolves, like other animals, have similar limitations. For example, wolves can hear upper frequencies that we can't, but at some point they have a range of hearing that is also limited. Their range is just different than ours, which means their experience of the world is different, and therefore they can come to different conclusions about the surroundings than we would. We're all restricted by the limitations of our senses. In other words, we all live in our own little bubble, having to negotiate our way through the world. And there's a word for that. It's called umvelt, which is the topic of this video. Next month, we'll see how a wolf's umvelt is constructed. But right now, let's review what an umvelt is and use wolves and other animals as examples. An umvelt is our collective perception, our view and interpretation of the surrounding world. In other words, it's our personal world, validated by how we perceive things and the emotions and thoughts that go with it. Umvelts are based on your anatomy, physiology, mood, past experience, and anything else that helps create how you experience life. However, it is limited by what your body can sense around it and internally. For example, no living creature can experience all the available information that exists in the world. Instead, they are limited by what their senses have the ability to perceive. Then they live their lives as though all other information doesn't exist. The ability to hear, see, smell, and so on all have limits. Our dogs, for example, can hear well beyond what we can. Same for their ability to smell. Of all the wavelengths of energy in the environment, we can only see visible spectrum, which is why it's called the visible spectrum. The result is that living organisms live their lives based on decisions using limited information, which is why you live in a bubble of sorts. You can't experience everything there is to experience. For instance, do you live your life and make decisions based on how an ant colony perceives the world? No. And they live their lives as though you don't exist. We may affect one another directly or indirectly now and then, but our lives are not based on that knowledge. Bees, they can see ultraviolet wavelengths. We don't. They use this information to navigate and see landing areas and flower petals, so they don't use the surroundings the same way we do. The meaning of flowers to them is quite different than it is to us. So although species can coexist in the same area, they each have their own reality of how the surroundings are experienced. That's their umvelt. For us humans anyway, science helps to provide information about our surroundings that we can't detect through our limited senses. And we use machines instead, among other things, which extends the range of our senses to experience environmental information we would normally not be exposed to. And this in turn expands the range of our umvelt, at least potentially. Much of the time we have to choose to want to know this information because it's not provided to us through our senses in real time. We actually have to read a book, for example, or take a class, or put ourselves in situations that we would usually avoid. In the meantime, like with all other animals, we still have to negotiate our way through the world using limited information and hopefully do so correctly. Otherwise, we can run into problems. For example, many of our assumptions about the world are potentially wrong because we don't have all the facts. And we can't because we don't experience everything there is to experience. For example, when you see the word wolf, what is the first thought that comes to mind? Well, for some people, they respond with awe, as wolves represent to them what it's like to be wild and living free. Others respond with anger and hatred, as if wolves are the spawn of Satan. The reality is that wolves are just wolves, and they live like that all the time, independent of human judgment. The idea here is to figure out exactly how they do that. So it's a matter of perspective, which is a product of your belt. But whose perspective are we talking about? For example, politics, wildlife management, reality. And if it's reality, whose reality? Is it the wolves, wildlife management, or science? So what are we really talking about here? The first thing we need to consider when understanding wolves is where our perspective comes from, along with the sense of reality we feel so strongly about. Our entire issue with wolves is based on this. Therefore, getting the facts about these animals is important when it comes to solving environmental issues that involve wolves. But, like other organisms, their existence affects the surrounding environment in many ways, and in the ecosystem everything is connected somehow, either directly or indirectly. Understanding umbelts is essential to understanding this process. That's because each species and each individual of that species perceives their surroundings differently. For example, a captive reared wolf will view its environment differently than a wild wolf placed into captivity. And these are the two wolves I studied in captivity, or some of them. And Joe was raised in captivity, and Tanana was born in the wild and placed into captivity. Two very different views of the world. In fact, Tanana suffered post-traumatic stress disorder because of it. In a future video, we'll review the results of that study, and you'll see some video of the two wolves and their behaviors. In humans, at least, and presumably with other animals, we also have our own personal umbelts. For example, a blind person will experience their life very differently than someone who has sight. Their remaining senses could become more acute, and they can live very functional and full lives. However, their experience of that life will still be very different than people with sight. This can be said for any difference among individuals. In fact, current brain research shows that the combination of our senses produces something a little different in everyone. None of us experiences the world in exactly the same way. It can be close, but not the same. This process helps create an umbelt unique to you. Plus, umbelts can change over time. For example, think of the older dogs you've experienced. Their eyesight and hearing becomes less acute as they age, and then their behavior changes to accommodate less information coming in. So they can become more easily startled, less playful, and so on. Aging muscles and bones contribute as well, of course. And the point is that their worldview doesn't stay the same. This happens to people, too. Although animals use an array of senses to measure the surrounding environment, they often have a primary sense they depend on the most. And brain research and studies have shown that the brain anatomy supports this conclusion. For example, for chimps, representing apes in this case, that includes us, that primary sense then is seeing or vision. For dolphins, they're acoustical animals. So, hearing or audition is their primary sense. For wolves, it's smell or olfaction. So whose reality is correct? Well, they all are. Their world is just as real to them as yours is to you. There are almost infinite number of worlds, all existing at the same time. However, umbelts are still based on real reference points or truths of the world, meaning the information that the environment provides, whether you know it or not. For example, there's a cliff over there. It doesn't matter how you perceive the cliff, just perceive it. Those who don't only make that mistake once. Which brings us back to negotiating your way through the world safely and with using limited information. But regardless, species have to get along with others most of the time. And obviously species provide food for each other, even if you live out your lifespan, because bacteria are necessary to disassemble your body into its elemental components after you die. Overall, it's like everyone is participating in an ongoing banquet. First as a guest, then eventually you're on the menu. But until that happens, you have to negotiate your way through the world and deal with other species at the same time. Now here's an example of negotiating your way through the environment involving species that experience the world very differently. These two wild turkeys were walking through an area where deer live, and they didn't bother to fly over the deer or walk around them. They just walked through them. In response, the deer momentarily were startled, but as the turkeys passed by, most of the deer got on with their routine, except for the closest deer, who stands there watching the birds walk by as if, "Did you guys see that? What are those things?" Turkeys don't frequent here very often, but they are around. The point is that awareness and some acceptance is needed to share the same general space, which some species take advantage of to get dinner, while other species are just passing through in the presence of others, like the turkeys. However, the deer respond differently if a predator is around, like this coyote, who was likely hunting the ground squirrels that live in the field. But the deer lived there too, and had this response to the coyote's presence. This particular deer, who's pregnant, stomped the ground in the usual deer fashion as a warning to the coyote. Then the others who were with her all trotted towards the coyote's direction as if it's time for some coyote stomping. That's because healthy prey animals can certainly hold their ground when it comes to some predators. In other words, dinner fights back, although it didn't appear that the coyote was going to make any attempt for a meal any larger than a ground squirrel. Nevertheless, the deer had something to say about it, and you'll see at the end of this video that one of the deer investigates where the coyote had been previously standing. There is always information to be had, and knowledge enhances survivability. But that depends on how your senses work and their limitations. Wolves have to deal with this kind of interaction all the time if they wish to eat, and have to do so as safely as possible, because dinner can kill you. So the goal here is to figure out what the world is like from the wolf's point of view. To eat and survive, wolves must kill things much larger than themselves, like deer, elk, moose, and so on. And these animals often fight back. And potentially, wolves must also defend themselves from other predators, such as bears, coyotes, cougars, and even other wolves. And of course, there's us. We're all sharing the same general space, but often at different times. For example, some animals are nocturnal, others are more active during the day, and so on. However, it's not like it's a free-for-all and everybody is constantly at war with one another. It's much more peaceful than that, until it's not, like when it's your time to be on the menu. In the meantime, though, if you can get through being born, along with the process of being young and learning quickly about your surroundings, then adulthood is the safest time of your life. After that, your skills will diminish, there'll be increasing health issues, and you can become more vulnerable again, like when you were younger. And these are the disadvantages that other life forms take advantage of so that they can live on. In the meantime, distance solves most potential issues. Just stay away from conflict as much as possible, given the fact that you're sharing space with everyone else and often competing for finite resources. And I see this all the time in the forest when cougars, bears, wolves, lynx, bobcats, and badgers often use exactly the same routes, just at different times during the 24-hour period. Some have the day shift, some have the night shift, and so on. And these animals also have senses that can detect when others are present and how relatively long it's been since somebody else was there. And this is apparent when predators establish territories, and scat and urine are purposely used to transmit this information and mark their territorial boundaries. This helps to reduce conflict among wildlife, but sometimes individuals just don't care, like when some wolf packs intrude upon another pack's territory. Therefore, some confrontation can be a necessity, but mostly you can pick and choose your fights as carefully as you can, and just don't start something you're not capable of finishing. In the wild, however, being injured is often the same thing as death, and unfortunately it just takes longer. Having said that, when it comes to wolves, they are tough animals. Sometimes when dead wolves are found, necropsies are performed that show that some individuals had previous injuries that they recovered from, like broken femurs, broken backs, crushed skulls, broken ribs, and jaws. You know, the small things. What we don't know is the number of animals that died from such injuries, which is likely to be most of them. Nevertheless, some individuals can live through some devastating injuries. The point of all this is that a wolf's life is extremely dangerous, and to be successful, when negotiating your surroundings, you have to be wise, experienced, and be physically capable of pulling it off. If you're not, then you need help from your own species. But if your species is not very social, then you're pretty much on your own. But there are ways you can get through the world by reducing potential inherent dangers, like avoiding it. Until, of course, when aging, illness, and injury take their toll. Regardless, to be successful, your unvelt needs to be appropriately and functionally matched with the environment in which you live. Now, how do we know such things? Because some perceptual limitations can be measured by science, and they can give us an idea of how other species construct their unbelts. So consider this. Shoni, my dog, she gets the zoomies multiple times a day and she's really fast. Try to see what she's doing as she passes by me. I froze the video at this point because you can see the expressiveness in her face and the exact body position she's in. What if you could see this kind of detail when she's moving quickly? Let me slow this down so you can see what I'm talking about as she passes by. She's going too fast in real time for my eyes to register what she's actually doing as she approaches. So as she gets closer, turns out she's looking right at my eyes, right into my face, making eye contact. Until she can't when she passes by. And then watch what she does when she hits the, or gets up onto the snow embankment. Right there is where she's about to plant her arm so she can make a quick turn to the right. Now, I didn't know she was doing all of these things, these details, without the help of a machine, like the camera. So unless I can slow down her movements, I had no idea she was doing any of those things. Now, you'll see her arm sticking out, but her legs going a slightly different direction. And that's because she's anticipating a sudden change in direction to the right. The pivotal point is where she plants her arms into the snow, which provides the leverage to make that very quick turn. If you were a predator and chasing down your prey, it would be advantageous to make eye contact with other pack members as you run full speed. And that's for efficient communication. And also to anticipate your prey's moves by seeing how their body changes positions before they make the turn, not after they make the turn. If you can see such details at high speed, this is like creating more time for yourself to calculate what's happening and to react appropriately, such as anticipate where the deer is about to go, rather than just follow behind it all the time and never really catch up. Well, wolves and other predators can do exactly that, including Shoni, which gives them the occasional advantage when it comes to catching prey. And how do we know? Well, science, because science is really cool, and it can measure the limits of perceptual abilities, which allows us to compare one species with another. In the next video, I'll show you, meaning next month, how your dogs and the wolves see the world strikingly differently than we do, because they can perceive motion in ways that we cannot. And this comes in handy when you're chasing down dinner. And I'll show you how that is measured and how we know all of this. In the meantime, if you would like to learn more about the concept of unbelts and review some fascinating examples, please read the award-winning book, The View from the Oak. I've used it in my college courses when I taught ecology, biology, animal behavior, and developmental psychology. And it's always been a student favorite. So next time, we'll see how the unvelt of a wolf is constructed, at least as we know it to be. And unvelts are truly fascinating, and the elk is vocalizing, so it must be time for questions. around will be an extended version of answering questions, because the subject of umvelts brings up a variety of topics all simultaneously, as you're about to see, and that requires a bit more extensive explanation. In fact, hopefully this will help summarize the concept of umvelts and show how it can be applied to everyday life. So here's a special edition of answering your questions. Recently, I've been asked about the accuracy of a wolf territory map that was created and posted onto social media by the Voyageurs Wolf Project, which is a field study of wolf packs in northern Minnesota. Field biologists like myself often raise an eyebrow when they see data this clearly delineated. That's because it's extremely rare for biological data to produce such straightforward patterns. This is especially true when it comes to animal behavior and how animals interact among themselves and with their surrounding environment. In other words, to me this map didn't look quite right, especially given the numerous overreaching comments on blogs and other social media platforms. To get some clarity on this, I contacted Voyageurs myself and asked if there was a published paper where this information was presented so that I can find out more background about the wolves themselves, the packs, the interactions, and that kind of thing. Voyageurs responded quickly and they answered my question. And they stated, "Hi Jay, thanks for reaching out. There is no study or paper about the pack territory map, just the map which shows the tracking data from 6 wolves in 6 different packs in 2018. And where the territories generally are." In other words, the territory boundaries are not that accurate, nor does Voyageurs claim they are. There were only 6 wolves involved, each from a different pack, and the pack territories were apparently adjacent to each other. That's all that can really be said about this wolf territory map. However, a vast number of social media comments claimed otherwise. The majority of these posts refer to how 6 packs were monitored rather than only 6 wolves, which is a very different context. The result was that many people believed and stated that the territorial map demonstrated how the wolves of 6 packs avoided and highly respected the territorial boundaries of the other packs. In the wild, this is only true in a general sense, and even the map shows this tendency, and only 6 wolves were involved. For example, all 6 wolves crossed over into another pack's apparent territory, at least somewhat, and the wolf from the white pack did so very obviously. The brightly colored pathways the wolves took overlap and sometimes hide the colors of the paths of the other wolves, which actually integrated with the paths of neighboring wolves. Nevertheless, none of this actually represents accurate territorial boundaries. In fact, science already knows that there is a kind of no-wolf's land on territorial borders where territories overlap and is frequented by wolves from multiple packs. These 6 wolves kind of show that, but again, the map only represents the movements of 6 wolves, not all members of the packs that they were in. Also, Voyageurs reported several times on their website and on social media that some wolves were killed by wolves from other packs. So obviously wolves don't always respect pack boundaries or each other. In the wild, that's usually what happens. The point is that this is only data on the travels of 6 wolves, which can't possibly represent the behaviors of all the wolves in their specific packs. The others were not monitored, and they could have been well inside another pack's territory and competing for limited resources, as indicated by the collared wolf and the white pack. In reality, this territory map doesn't show much of anything. It's interesting, but Voyageurs found out much more critical and accurate information when following these wolves on the ground. But there's no way to know what the territorial boundaries really were. To know that, some questions need to be answered, and here are a few examples of that. What are by far the majority of other wolves doing? That's one question. And where are they going? Are they intruding into another pack's territory or not? Are they chased out? Are there confrontations? Are they genetically related? Are these packs splinter groups from other packs and perhaps just visiting each other? And there's a lot more questions to ask, which scientists could try to find out. But the splinter group question was actually kind of answered with the fish trap pack. And that pack I studied for 9 years. and a splinter group actually had formed, and the wolves would travel over an entire mountain range to visit with one another, then return to their home territories. In fact, at this time, I was tracking a wolf who had really large paws, over 5 inches in length, at least in the front, which is unusual. During one of these forays over the mountains, he attempted to cross a major road on the other side, and unfortunately was killed by a vehicle. So I'm going to take you on a brief detour here because the subject has everything to do with today's topic. The wolf I'm referring to is currently mounted in the local Forest Service office, although I didn't know that until the end of last year. We had never met, and I didn't know what he looked like until then. And I remember being on a survey and tracking the fish trap pack after he had been killed, and I had seen his prints. They were several weeks old, but still embedded in the drying mud, but now with bits of pine needles on top and some moss growing inside on the impressions. And I thought at the time, I'm never going to see that again. 20 years later, I did. And it was sad then, and it's sad now. This is where the emotions come in when you're a scientist. Collecting data must be objective and follow scientific protocols. However, it can also bring you closer to the lives of the animals you're studying. And in a way, studying wild wolves and living immersed in their world like Shoni and I do involves a low level and occasional feeling of grief lurking in the background. Not every day, but it consistently comes up. Wolves die for many reasons, and most don't even get close to the potential lifespans, which is especially personal when it happens to the wolves you're studying. We'll revisit this concept when we go over my studies of the fish trap pack and Tenino, the wild wolf placed into captivity, and it all involves major loss. Although such lows come with the job, so do the major highs of experience of the wolf's world, and seeing things no one else sees, and the understanding that comes with it all. Grief, as it turns out, has become an important and welcome process that keeps me connected to the realities of these wolves' lives. That's my unbuilt. So before I took these pictures of his mounted body, I stood close and admired his large paws, including the back ones in this case, and his beautiful coat. And I missed following him. And I felt the reality that wolves have very difficult lives, and humans have added to this hardship with vehicles, in hunting and management and other processes, which means collecting good data about these animals is really important, but often problematic. So, back to the map to see how data is collected about these animals. Although the data from these 6 wolves doesn't say a whole lot, it is at least a nice start and a place where voyagers can form a hypothesis. For example, a possible hypothesis is the movements of these 6 wolves indicate that pack territories appear to be relatively respected. Now they have to prove it by answering the questions I mentioned along with many other questions. But such information is notoriously difficult to measure in the field, and Voyagers has stated this a number of times in the information they provide to the public. Studying wild wolves is really, really hard, and in a number of respects, as you have seen. So, when interpreting scientific data or trying to find accurate information of any kind, it would be good to keep in mind some basic questions while you're doing so. Most notably, how do you know? Where did the information come from? In fact, what is the original source? Voyagers simply presented some data on 6 wolves that were running around, and this quickly became entire packs that do this instead. And it's no secret there's misinformation on social media, of course, so caution is needed, especially when scientific information is involved. And you're going to encounter answers based on other people's unbuilts, which may not be very accurate. The best way to get accurate information is go straight to the source, not from people's emotion-filled interpretations that push their agendas, then stated as facts, then sent around the world with a single keystroke. What they say may sound good, but it could be completely wrong, which is why I asked Voyagers myself and received a response directly from them. So if you don't know, ask the original source. And I would think at this point in time that most people agree that the internet can be both joyous and mean. And it's a way to stay connected, but also be vulnerable to maliciousness. And of course, many people don't intend to cause harm, and they pass along information with good intent. However, that information can still be incorrect if not fully checked out. But it's not all gloom and doom. There were at least some people's comments I encountered who figured out that this map was not accurate regarding territorial boundaries, and they said so. It's also possible that many other people figured this out too, but they didn't post their views about it. When it comes to the wolves themselves, however, the reality is that they're not nature's perfect children, and they're going to do things a lot of people aren't going to like or even expect, like kill other wolves. However, they are another species living in another niche, and they're fascinating creatures. But in the end, they're wolves, and they're going to do what they do, and scientists are trying to figure that out, but the information is far from complete. For instance, in national parks, wolf behavior can be different in many respects than wolves who live in national forests, where most wolves live. In a captivity, wolves behave differently than all the wild wolves, no matter where the wild wolves live. So all these things need to be taken into consideration because they all have different umbelts and see the world a bit differently. However, people's umbelts can be narrow or wide, but when it comes to science, it's the process of finding the facts of the world. Is that process perfect? No, but it's still infinitely better than guessing or using interpretations that are filled with emotions. Personal views have no place in science when it comes to interpreting data. However, when solving issues, compassion and empathy are basically required, and emotion is a great benefit to help propel solutions forward. Just know the difference. In the meantime, scientists use the scientific method to keep themselves in check, because they're people too, and they have biases like anybody else. However, in the end, the scientific method is the most powerful process humanity has come up with to find at least some truths that's about the surrounding world, and sometimes beyond, if you're an astrophysicist. Although we can't measure everything, science does have its limits too. And in the process of weeding out human bias, which is one of the features of the scientific method, it can often take a long time to sort things out, like centuries, but we eventually get there. And science is not truth itself per se, but the process of finding the truth about the surrounding world, which means science may change its opinions about a previous discovery, but that doesn't mean it lied to the people previous to that. It just learned more about that discovery. So scientists go with the flow of where the data leads itself. So the next time, we'll go with that flow and go over in more detail how wolves experience their world and what the current data shows. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.